Hello and welcome to the Steamy, the Scotsman's Politics podcast. It's the moment we've all been waiting for. Holyrood has broken for recess, which means the Scottish Parliament election campaign has officially kicked off. Over the next 6 weeks, politicians will be out in force, hammering home their key messages in a desperate bid to convince you, the voter, to back them at the polls. Election campaigns can be unpredictable, they can be chaotic, occasionally even thrilling, but they can also be incredibly repetitive, let's face it. Every major party, except, interestingly, Nigel Farage's Reform UK, had events on Thursday to launch their campaigns. The SNP were at, I believe, the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow. Scottish Labour were at the Barras. The Greens, the Tories, Liberal Democrats all had various events at different locations in Edinburgh. We were at them all to soak up the atmosphere, quiz the party leaders, and find out exactly what they will be pitching to voters over the coming weeks until May 7th. Here is a wee snippet of what John Swinney and Anna Sarwar had to say when they addressed activists and candidates in Glasgow earlier.
If we win big, if we persuade enough of our fellow citizens to put their faith in us, we can achieve a historic majority that will deliver so much more. Because an SNP majority does two things. It unlocks the potential for truly transformational change with independence. And it locks Nigel Farage out of any influence in Scotland's Parliament. That is the goal we are setting ourselves today, and that is the outcome I intend to deliver for the people of Scotland. Because be in no doubt, depending on how the numbers stack up after the election, without an SNP majority, there is always the potential for a grubby backroom deal between Labour and Reform. So let us resolve today that we will take them on, we will defeat them, we will make sure that Nigel Farage is locked out of power, and we will make sure that Scotland's future is in Scotland's hands. And an SNP majority will deliver for us the greatest prize, the right for Scotland to decide our own future in a referendum. It happened in 2011, and I'm determined that it will happen again in 2026, because the case for independence has never been greater.
Let me be clear about our ambition and our goal. It is to win, it is to elect a new First Minister, and it's to elect a Scottish Labour government on the 7th of May. Over the next 6 weeks, we'll be making it clear that after 20 years of SNP government, Scotland needs change, and this is the only party that can deliver it. Because the fact is, only Scottish Labour can beat the SNP. This is the only campaign that can change the government and fix the SNP's mess. This is the only campaign that can change the government and make sure we get the basics right. And this is the only campaign that can win and build a better future for our country, Scotland. This is the first opportunity in a generation to change the government in Scotland, and it's one that we cannot afford to miss. And I say to anyone that underestimates the Scottish Labour Party, this is not an opportunity we will miss, and we will win on the 7th of May.
That was John Swinney and Anna Sarwar. And David, you were at the SNP event this morning in the Citizens Theatre. What was that like, and what was John Swinney's message to activists?
Yeah, there was a lot of positivity around, as we would expect, given the polls are looking pretty rosy for John Swinney. It kind of feels like their election to lose. But the message was actually quite a negative message, was that if they don't reach this majority, we have to bear in mind, getting a majority at Holyrood is very difficult. It's only happened once before. So the kind of achievement, the bar has been set very high by John Swinney. But he was warning that if that doesn't happen, potentially the alternative could be a sort of grubby deal between Labour and Reform. And although, I mean, we'll hear about, you were at the Labour event, what Anna Sarwar had to say about it, but it is kind of true that any kind of unionist coalition or loose coalition is the only way that Anna Sarwar can kind of remove the SNP from power. So he was very much playing on that. We heard from John Swinney actually the last day of Parliament yesterday, in relation to some stuff about Malcolm Offord, going really hard on reform, which he hasn't really done before. We've heard him kind of oppose some of the policies he disagrees with, but kind of staying clear a little bit about alienating some of those would-be reform voters. But it does feel like this is kind of painting reform as a villain in this, and those voters who may be tempted to back Labour instead of the SNP, trying to warn them that they could let Nigel Farage into Holyrood in some influential way by the back door. That was his overall message. He kind of stood on a banner with hope written below him on his podium. Quite a simple message. It's quite similar to the Labour one we saw in 2024 on change. And he was kind of painting a picture that he's the only party and potential First Minister who can set out a kind of positive vision for Scotland. So it'd be interesting to see how long that positivity stays, but also really hammering that reform potential coalition as he claimed.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was at the Scottish Labour event in Glasgow. It was on at roughly the same time as the SNP event. Anna Sarwar, key message very much that Scottish Labour are the only ones who can beat the SNP across Scotland. But he was obviously given time to respond to what John Swinney had said on reform and on this idea of a kind of grubby backroom deal between the SNP, between Labour and Reform, because John Swinney had spoken slightly before Anna Sarwar, and Anna Sarwar was unequivocal that there would be no coalitions, deals, stitch-ups with Reform. He said he wouldn't touch Nigel Farage's party. He kind of brought up this social media advert that they'd done before during the Hamilton by-election. People might remember the row over this, which he called horrific, said it kind of questioned his Scottish identity. So he's very, very firm that they're not going to do any kind of grubby backroom deals, as John Swinney put it, with Reform. But you're quite right to obviously point out as well that pretty much the only route to Bute House for Anna Sarwar sort of relies on Reform votes for him to become First Minister. But I think it's kind of interesting that this focus on reform from John Swinney, I mean, this is something they tried before in that by-election and it didn't work then, but obviously the circumstances now are very different. The polling has changed. Reform are now consistently polling as the second party in Scotland. But Rachel, you were at some of the events in Edinburgh. I think you managed actually to get to both of them, or all three of them actually, which is incredibly impressive. You were at the Lib Dems? You were definitely at the Greens, and you were at the
Unfortunately, I couldn't manage the Lib Dems as they were on at the same time as the Greens. But yes, this morning the Greens were up Calton Hill. Lovely, nice views over Edinburgh, and although it was a small group, they were very, 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 very happy. They're looking forward to the election campaign. They're feeling very, very good, particularly about their chances in Edinburgh. They were very, very keen to emphasise, we're going to win Edinburgh Central. We really want to get Edinburgh Central. It could be our first constituency seat win. So very keen to emphasise that. Also, I think probably the best campaign launch because they had dogs. It was an outdoor event, which meant that we had dogs at the campaign launch, and we can always welcome that. So that was always good news there. So that was in the morning. Unfortunately, it meant that I missed the Lib Dems who were in Newhaven. That's the Edinburgh Northern constituency. Now, we know that the Lib Dems, they are very keen on constituency seats in targeted areas, and that is one of the areas that they think they can do very, very well in. They're already saying that they can beat the SNP in that seat. So that's quite an interesting race to watch out for as well, and interesting to see how both the Lib Dems and the Greens are trying to focus on Edinburgh here and thinking that they could do well in this area, because they're both parties that are going to do well at this election. I think they're both wanting to add their numbers up beyond that. I don't know if you can see behind me, I've got Edinburgh Castle in the background here. So now the other side of Edinburgh City Centre for the Scottish Tories campaign launch. So I'm still at the venue, but it's just finished. Again, a smaller crowd than perhaps we've had in previous years for the Conservatives, but again, a lot of emphasis on trying to keep the mood going, trying to keep everyone excited. Quite keen for them to get lots of young supporters in the background of the shots, with Russell Finlay, for example, as well. Again, they seem to be ignoring the fact that it hasn't been going so well in the polls for them recently, and they're very keen to emphasise that they can stop the SNP from getting a majority, even though, as you have just said, there's a lot of other factors at play here, and perhaps it's not the Conservatives that are going to be the big players when it comes to that particular story. We spoke to Russell Finlay, the party leader, afterwards. He says he's not worried about his own seat because there might be a bit of an issue there with his seat. He might not get re-elected. But he says he's not worried about that at all. Very much keen to talk about independence, even though we know that's not a priority for voters at this election, so an interesting choice there too. But I'm also thinking that we might need to get Roz. Roz is our food and drink editor, and we think we need to get her onto the scene because lots of talk about peaches and coconuts at this election campaign launch. So perhaps we can get her to come in and make some kind of nice drink for us to celebrate the election period, given Russell Finlay's speech earlier.
So peaches is obviously the peach ballot, the second vote that people have, the so-called second vote when you're voting for the list candidate. What is coconut?
Yes, so as you're saying, the peach ballot paper, so Russell Finlay said he wants everyone dreaming of peaches, and the coconut comment was in response to journalists trying to ask him, would you be doing a deal with Reform after the election? Who would you want to work with? We're trying to really get down into, if we're talking about only one or two sort of seats in it to block the SNP, would you work with Reform? And his response was, if, buts and coconuts, which got a few giggles from people in the room. So yes, peaches and coconuts, which apparently I googled, you do get a cocktail called a peachy colada. So there's something that maybe perhaps we can ask Roz in the food and drink team. I'm sure she can come up with something nice for us.
Andrew, we should bring up Reform. As I said earlier, they didn't do a kind of major campaign launch event today, perhaps in connection with the fact that they've been losing candidates over recent days. I think they were due to do something with broadcasters today, but didn't end up happening. Perhaps I'm wrong about that. But can you talk us through what the latest kind of Reform drama has been?
Yeah, so we had, Reform conference was a week ago. I think it was Thursday last week. And yeah, they announced a whole slate of 70 odd constituency candidates. They've already lost 4 of them, which is quite amazing. I don't think any party can have lost candidates that quickly. And today it was Linda Holt, who was a North East Fife candidate. Now, she became well known, I guess, because she'd said some pretty controversial things about Hamza Yusuf. She'd called him an Islamist, a brown FM. She'd insinuated that the Scottish Government was a PR firm for Hamas as well while he was First Minister. So these were pretty controversial comments which came out after she was selected as a candidate. But actually, Reform decided not to boot her at all. In fact, Malcolm Offord went on the telly on Sunday and he was like, look, people have said fruity things in the past. In fact, those comments he pretty much justified because he was kind of saying, well, it was straight after the October 7th attacks and there was like an emotional time and she wasn't happy with Hamza Yusuf's reaction to that. So he pretty much defended her. But then today she announced she was withdrawing because of the lack of support from the party. But I think really what has happened here is they came out with their regional list selections yesterday evening, and Linda Holt was well down on the Mid-Scotland and Fife list. I think she might have been 8th. So there's no chance of her really being elected because she was, for her to have been elected in North East Fife would have been an unbelievable upset. That's a Lib Dem seat. I'm pretty sure it's Willie Rennie, isn't it? So, yeah, it would have been absolute madness. The chances of her being elected were pretty slim. So it seems like she's maybe gotten a bit of a huff because she hasn't got the list place. So then she hasn't got to become an actual MSP. So yeah, it's just, it's quite crazy. And yeah, Malcolm Offord, obviously he's had quite a lot of controversy this week. He emerged that when he was at a rugby club in 2018, he publicly made quite a vile joke about George Michael, who'd passed away, about George Michael and his partner, quite a homophobic joke. He apologised for that, but it all came out this week. But Linda Holt actually gave him quite a lot of backing over that as well. So it's interesting just how quickly these things move. And yeah, Malcolm Offord was meant to be speaking to broadcasters today. But yeah, I think after the stuff about Linda Holt, they've obviously decided against it. It means I'm pretty sure he's not made a public appearance since the stuff about the homophobic joke. So yeah, they're kind of dodging scrutiny at the moment. That might be fine for them though, is the reality, because a lot of people who are voting Reform, it's just more about a protest vote or it's about immigration. So are these things really going to impact them that much? Might not. But it does seem quite crazy that everyone else is launching their campaigns, and the party, which is really going to be, I would say, the most pivotal party in the election, because it's going to be determining whether Labour has enough to form a minority or whether the SNP gets a majority, because of the votes it takes away from either party. And they're actually not even launching their campaign or doing any media. So it's quite a mad state of affairs that I don't think we've ever had for a Holyrood election before.
Yeah, it almost feels like Reform could basically do nothing up until now in the election, and they'd still have some votes, and a very good number of votes in the bag, because they're just seen as this kind of disrupting force. This force is going to come in and shake Holyrood up. People who are obviously sick of the mainstream parties are backing them. And I think that's kind of what pollsters like John Curtis and that have said, that they've got this kind of segment of support that aren't going to really move away from them. And certainly some of the controversy around that joke from Malcolm Offord obviously provoked a lot of headlines, a lot of outrage, that might not really have been that damaging for them.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I know a fair amount of folk who are voting Reform. They maybe didn't vote previously, or kind of voted but thought all politicians were rubbish. And I don't think they're that bothered by these things. I think maybe Malcolm Offord, he's not as ideal a person to be leading it as like Nigel Farage, though. I think if they had Farage leading the whole campaign up here, I think it would actually go better for them, because I think people, although he's not Scottish, he has got a certain charisma about him. You might not like him, but he's definitely he's a charismatic leader, and he definitely convinces folk to vote for him. And I mean, he's had a long career. Malcolm Offord, perhaps, I think so far we've seen he's not got that same skill. So far, at least, and I think the Scottish parties are thinking, well, actually, he might put people off instead. And I mean, he's had a few kind of car crash moments. He had it when he was announced as a leader. He was asked an awful lot about that Anna Sarber advert that you were talking about earlier on, and basically his staff had to step in to stop people interviewing him. Now that's quite crazy, and it doesn't look like a strong sort of leader, and you would never get that with Nigel Farage. You know what I mean? He's really up for debate. He's up for putting his point across. He doesn't shy away from it. So I think having the separate Scottish campaign isn't helping them at all, and it would actually be better for them to basically have Farage leading the whole thing.
David, I wanted to touch on the piece that you'd written recently. I think looking at the differences between the SNP and Labour, and the sort of internal battle between them to come up with a sort of different policy platform to differentiate themselves in that regard. Because that is one of the key battles of this election. I mean, Reform are taking up so much airspace and so much airtime, and so much kind of headline space, and will do very well. And obviously they are probably the most interesting story of the election, and we will do lots of coverage about them. But it is sort of still a battle that's going on here between Labour and the SNP across lots of the Central Belt anyway in Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whatever the polls may look like with Reform aren't going to be in position to form a government. So it is an Anna Sarwar backed by some unionist MSPs to get voted in as First Minister, or John Swinney. So the onus is really on Scottish Labour to bring forward some plans to show that they can do things differently. And I know we're one day into the campaign, but these parties have been on an election footing for months now, and we're yet to see really any meaty proposal from Anna Sarwar that would inspire voters, I suppose. A lot of the policies that we've seen him bring forward so far have been sort of SNP commitments that they've maybe failed to deliver on. And that is a key issue, and a key thing that Labour can thrive on is that failure for the SNP to deliver. But he hasn't really set out any of his own ideas and how he would do things differently. It's kind of an SNP person earlier was talking to me about this and said it's kind of like a football team changing the manager. It's like I can do better things with the same policies, in the same as they could do better things with the same players. And it does feel like a managerial kind of pitch to the public at the moment. So those policies I think will matter. Labour do need to paint this picture that they can bring forward some kind of positive vision and sway voters, because it's all down to them to move the dial with voters. And so far we haven't seen that. There's still obviously a long way to go, but they need to do something drastic to tighten those polls. If they're going to have any chance of getting Anna Sawar into Butte House, those polls need to be a lot tighter, and it's going to take something from them and them to set out some sort of vision with the public that is going to kind of create some noise about them. And yeah, there's a lot of onus on Labour, and since their kind of party conference in Paisley a few weeks ago, it's not been the best looking campaign anyway. We've seen a lot of focus on Glasgow from Anna Sawar. It's all felt quite parochial, to be honest. We're yet to see him kind of paint that vision of what a Scottish Labour government could look like. So yeah, there's a long way to go. And at the moment, the big ideas, although they're kind of rehashed, to be perfectly fair, have come from the SNP. So the onus is very much on Labour to come forward with something tangible that people can get excited about.
And Rachel, you sort of touched on this, but because you were at the Greens and obviously the Lib Dems were doing their own launch just down the road, they are both parties that are very much targeting specific areas, specific constituencies. What constituencies do you think people should look out for in this election? What will be the most interesting battles, do you think?
Well, we're wanting to focus on the Scottish Greens. They currently don't have any MSP in the south of Scotland, so they're very keen to win a seat there. The two constituencies that they've got their eye on is Edinburgh Central and Glasgow South Side. Now, regardless of what happens in these two constituencies, it is going to be a tight race, so both of those ones are going to be good ones to keep an eye out for. The Lib Dems, on the other hand, they have certain strongholds that have been strongholds for them for a long, long time. We were mentioning North East Fife, for example, earlier in the podcast. I mean, that's just Lib Dem through and through. But they're hoping to make some gains in the far North Highlands, for example. So Caithness, Sutherland and Ross, Inverness and Nairn, Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch. Those are three seats that they are very keen to be winning in the Lib Dem. So they are quite interesting to keep an eye on. But to be honest, Edinburgh and Glasgow, I think, are the two areas that might be really, really good to keep watching, because the boundaries have completely changed. There's areas that are taking in all kinds of strongholds. There's some areas that were very heavily Labour, for example, and they're now maybe more taking in SNP areas, maybe taking in Lib Dem areas. And given how much the Labour Party swept across the Central Belt during the general election, their support has gone. Is that going to affect their vote in the Central Belt? So that being said, I think Edinburgh and Glasgow is probably two areas that we need to really be keeping an eye on. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Well, we will be out and about throughout is it 6 weeks? I think it's 6 weeks until the Holyrood election, with all the latest goings on. We'll have news, analysis, we'll have videos. We've got lots of good ideas for podcasts and stuff as well coming up. I should also flag the fact that we have a hustings event that we're doing with Scotland 2050 on Tuesday, March 31st, Assembly Rooms in Edinburgh. You can get tickets on Eventbrite. They are completely free. All you need to do is sign up and then come along. We've got representatives from all of the main parties in Holyrood. Malcolm Offord, for example, will be there. Perhaps we will hear from him about that joke. Maybe things will have moved on by then. I don't know. But until next week, thank you very much for listening.